One of the key traits of the best YPO leaders is that they are habitual learners. Whether they like to go to YPO educational events, or listen to podcasts, or TED Talks, or read good old-fashioned books like I do, upgrading their thinking and their worldview is a critical component of how leaders stay relevant and how they're going to be successful long into the future. One of the books that has been incredibly valuable to me in my thinking, both during my YPO chairman year, but also in my business, was Sapiens. And it's written by Professor Yuval Noah Harari. And I found the book because it was recommended on a book list by Bill Gates and later Barack Obama as one of the most influential books that both of them had read within the last 10 years. So if it was good enough for them, I had to check it out, and it absolutely blew my mind. Sapiens is about how the human mind and society developed together over the last 70,000 years, and his most recent book, Homo Deus, is about how the human mind is going to grow going forward with all of the incredible exponential technological advances that are occurring in our society today. I had a chance recently to sit down with Professor Harari and have a great conversation about his books, about his thinking, about his meditation practice, about all sorts of cool things, and I want to share it with you now. Welcome to the YPO Source, and it is my pleasure to be with Professor Yuval Noah Harari, I think one of the finest minds in the world right now, talking not only about the history of humanity, back to its origins, but also talking about the history of the future of humanity, which I think the YPO members around the world will find fascinating. So welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So glad to have you. So our members around the world are 25,000 CEOs, and we're people who are at the center of our tiny little universes, wherever we are in 130 countries. We're often asked to not only lead the people around us and create the stories that make success for all of us, but we're the people that have to often interpret what's happening in the world and to be both present with what's going on, whether it's in politics or changes in society, and certainly changes in thought. And I cannot imagine a better mind to help us frame sort of where we've come from and where we're going than you. So it's really our pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. I'll do my best.
That's all we can ever do, and that's kind of how YPO views ourselves as members. We're here to learn and grow, and do the best at understanding the world. So, I first learned about Sapiens because your book Sapiens, when it was recommended both by Bill Gates as one of the top 5 books to read that he had read in a long time, and then Barack Obama. Which must be a pretty cool thing
yes.
to have that kind of
big
recognition.
Surprise.
Yes.
The publisher was enthusiastic, of course.
And thrilled,
Yeah.
I'd imagine. And I heard when we were just speaking a few minutes ago that you get something like 100 requests for interviews a day, so we're truly...
interviews and talks and lectures and all together.
Okay, well, it's amazing thinking. So if we were to summarize the thesis, I guess, of Sapiens, the past. What are some of the things that we should be thinking about as leaders that you brought up in the book?
Well, the main question in Sapiens is how did an insignificant ape from East Africa manage to conquer the entire planet in a very short time? 70,000 years ago, our ancestors were still basically insignificant apes in East Africa, and today they completely dominate this planet. And 70,000 years is a very, very short time in evolutionary terms. It's yesterday morning, basically. And the answer that I suggest in Sapiens is that humans control the world because we are the only species that is able to cooperate flexibly in very large numbers. There are species that can cooperate in large numbers, like ants and bees, but they are inflexible. There is basically one way in which a beehive functions, and if there is a new opportunity or a new danger, the bees don't have the flexibility to reinvent their social and political system overnight. They can't have a revolution, execute the queen bee, and establish a democracy or a communist dictatorship of bees. Now, there are other species like wolves and chimpanzees that they are far more flexible than bees and ants, but they can cooperate only in very small numbers because cooperation among other social mammals, like the chimpanzees, is based on intimate knowledge, one of the other. And because you cannot really know more than 100 individuals personally, it can't be the basis for large-scale cooperation. Humans are the only species, as far as we know, that can do both things. They can cooperate in a very large numbers, millions, today even billions, and still do so very flexibly. And you see it very clearly in the business world, that you have not just small companies of 100 people, you have companies of hundreds of thousands of employees, and still they manage to retain some kind of flexibility. If you build a worldwide corporation with millions of employees, but you have no flexibility, then you won't be able to survive for more than 5 years or so. And all the big achievements of humankind, not just in business, but in all fields of activity, are based on this large-scale cooperation. We managed to reach the moon or to decipher DNA, not thanks to the intelligence of a particular genius, but thanks to the cooperation of millions of people. Now the question is, what enables humans to cooperate so flexibly with millions of strangers? And the answer I give in Sapiens is that it's our imagination. It's our ability to invent and believe and spread fictional stories. And as long as everybody believes the same fiction, the same story, everybody follows the same laws, the same rules, and they can cooperate. It's obvious in the case of religion that millions of people come together to build a cathedral or a mosque or to fight on a crusade or a jihad because they all believe the same story about God and heaven and hell. But it's the same in all other fields of human activity. In the economic field, corporations themselves are just a story. They are not a physical reality. If you think about the big corporations like, Google or Apple or General Motors or Monsanto, what are they? They are what lawyers call a legal fiction. They are a story invented by lawyers, and as long as everybody believes in the story, it works. And most corporations, what they try to do all day is to basically make money. And money too is just a story invented by humans. And money has no objective value whatsoever. You cannot eat dollar bills and you cannot drink them. There is nothing to do with them. But as long as everybody believes in the stories that the Federal Reserve tells us, and that the World Bank tells us, and the IMF tells us, then it works. I can take a worthless piece of paper, go to a complete stranger who I never met before, give him this piece of paper, and receive in return a banana that I can actually eat. So it's all based on creating and believing stories.
Well, so consumerism must be maybe the greatest story, or just commerce is almost the greatest story of the modern era.
I think that money is probably the best story ever told by human beings because it's the only story everybody believes. If you go throughout history, then you see many successful stories like the big religions or the big national mythologies, but you never see a story that convinces everybody. Not everybody believes in Jesus Christ. Not everybody believes in the Quran. Not everybody believes in French nationalism or Russian nationalism. But everybody believes in money and in the same money. It won't work if some people believe in one money and other people believe in a different money. It can't work, commerce. But with money, everybody believes in the same dollars. Like even if you look at the, Islamic State. So as ISIS conquered cities and villages in northern Iraq and in Syria, very often they would kill people, they would destroy all symbols of the Iraqi and Syrian state, they will destroy archaeological sites, but one thing they never did, they never burned the money. If they took over a bank, let's say Mosul, so they may kill all the clerks, and they may destroy all the symbols, but when they found American dollars with pictures of American presidents, with slogans on the dollars that praise democracy and so forth, they didn't burn them. They took them and they made use of them because even the Islamic State believes in the dollar.
That's a great insight. That's a fantastic insight. So, I mean, before we maybe start shifting towards the latest book, which is fantastic, the quick plug, Homo Deus. In Sapiens, when you talk about this 70,000-year history and the multiple revolutions, from the cognitive revolution to the agricultural revolution to the scientific, you talk a lot about the human mind, and later I hope to talk a little bit about your own study of your own mind and how you're coming to understand it. But you say that because humanity sort of made this giant leap because of the cognitive revolution, that some of the old fears and old sort of, I don't know, maybe the old parts of the mind that existed prior to the cognitive revolution are still with us. And they're causing a lot of problems in the world today. So,
yeah, we still have basically a Stone Age mind with 21st century technology. Yeah. And this is a very dangerous combination because the drives, the desires, the biases that were shaped in the African savannah tens of thousands of years ago, now you can press a button and the entire world goes up in flames. So this is a very dangerous combination.
It's terrifying, actually, if you think about it. A lot of calamities ensue with some of the fears that we drive. And what I talk about a lot, getting to meet a lot of CEOs and business leaders and world leaders around the world, is how much of their activity is driven by fear.
Yeah.
And no matter what, whatever success they may be experiencing, a lot of their just core motivations are driven by fears. And you can tell that maybe we're almost overwired for the modern world.
Yeah, I mean, I see it most obviously in the case of terrorism, which if you look at the facts, if you look at the statistics, it's a tiny nuisance. I mean, the damage in property and in human life, which is caused by terrorism, is totally insignificant. If you look at the United States, for example, since 9/11 until today, more Americans died from nut allergy than from terrorism. But you don't see people say, "Oh, let's expel all the nuts from America." They are killed. No, and the reaction to terrorism is basically theater, which hijacks our imagination and our fear. Terrorists kill 20 people, but they do so in a theatrical way. It's a well-staged theater production, and the media immediately replicates it millions of times, and this is how they capture our imagination and turn it against us. They kill 20 people, and millions of people now fear that there is a terrorist behind every tree and behind every building. And you go to entire wars and you persecute entire populations just because of this fear. It's completely irrational. It has no basis in statistical facts, but it is extremely effective. And this is a good example for the danger of mixing Stone Age emotions with modern day technologies.
It's that difference between understanding sort of the real world that's around us and maybe a real lack of awareness we now have of the real world around us versus that dual reality, right? Of fears and the stories that we all live in.
Yeah, I mean the terrorists they manage to produce an extremely successful story. It's like a Hollywood blockbuster, and this is their power. It's not like in the past when you had an army that would really conquer a country and kill millions of people and so forth. No, they don't have the capacity to do that. They can only produce theater shows, but they are so good at it. Yeah. And the media and the politicians often cooperate with them that they do manage to change the world, to change global politics with just a few good theater production.
Well, and my own observation, when you watch people with their screens, And you think of social media, you think of the mainstream media, and they just replay the images over and over again. And I almost think that the human mind is incapable of blocking it out.
Yeah.
You just, you're sucked into this very negative reality, or sucked into a business reality, and then you have a very strong reaction. As you said, it's behind every tree might be the terrorist.
Yeah.
Yes. So, shifting to Homo Deus, so we have we just covered 70,000 years there. So this is your history of tomorrow.
Yes.
And so tell us about this book and what you're
Well,
bringing to us.
it's of course a very different kind of book,
Yes.
Because we don't know what will happen in the future. In Homo Deus, I try not to predict the future. This is impossible. Nobody has any idea how the world would look like in 2050 or 2100. What I do attempt to do is to map different possibilities. In order to start a discussion, to start a debate, especially about the more dangerous possibilities, hopefully in order to prevent them. If you make a prophecy, then this is what is going to happen, nothing we can do can change it, so what's the point?
Right.
But if you just say, okay, this is a possibility, it can happen, but we can prevent it, and especially if it's a dangerous possibility, then the idea is to do something about it. So I outlined several dangers or potential scenarios. For example, this humankind splitting into biological castes, because bioengineering gives us, for the first time in history, the ability to translate economic inequality into biological inequality. So, and then humankind splits into really different species or different biological castes. Another danger, which we already see beginning to happen around us, is that with the rise of artificial intelligence and machine learning, more and more jobs will be lost, and we might end up with a massive useless class. Millions of people who have no economic value and therefore also no political authority. Another danger is that authority in all fields will shift from humans to algorithms. More and more decisions, both on a personal level and on the collective level, will be taken for us by algorithms, and we don't even understand why. And it's starting to happen today. You apply to the bank for a loan, for a mortgage, and your application in some banks today is not processed by a human being, it's processed by an algorithm based on big data. And the algorithm says, no, don't give this person a mortgage. There is a high likelihood he or she will not return it. So the bank says no. And then you ask the bank, why did you refuse my request? And the bank says, oh, the algorithm said no. And you ask, why? What's wrong with me? And the bank would say, we don't know. I mean, we just trust the algorithm.
Right.
If we could understand how the algorithm reached this conclusion, we wouldn't need the algorithm. The whole promise of big data and machine learning algorithms is that they can recognize patterns that human beings cannot. And this is the essence of the idea of authority shifting from humans to algorithms, and especially to algorithms that humans cannot understand. So more and more decisions about practical things, like mortgages, are taken in a way which we can't understand. And if there is a problem there, we can't even protest. Like in the 20th century, you had a lot of problem with discrimination. But discrimination was against entire groups of people. Like you had a bias that against black people or against women or against gays or against Jews. And then you wouldn't hire a Jew or a gay person to work because they are Jewish or because they are gay. And at least you knew what was wrong with you. Oh, the problem is it's because I'm gay. And also you could organize yourself with other people in the same situation to take some political action. And you have a gay liberation movement. But in the 21st century, the discrimination will not be based on such crude statistics about entire groups, discrimination is likely to be individual. The algorithm didn't hire you for the job because it's you. There is something about you, just you, that the algorithm doesn't like, and therefore you didn't get the job. And you don't know what this something is, and even if you knew, what can you do about it? I mean, there is nobody else in the world in the same situation. So these are just some of the dangers and scenarios and possibilities that I try to outline in Homo Deus.
Well, on the one hand, you start the book by, describing how, the world is literally conquering many of the great dangers of our past.
Yeah.
War, there are still wars, of course, but not on the scale that history ever saw. Famine, plague, all of these things are now able to be reasonably controlled by scientific means.
Yeah, I mean, for the first time in history, if you look at, for most of history, the three big problems of humankind were always the same. It was famine, plague, and war. And today, all of them are to a large extent under our control. They are no longer, uncontrollable forces of nature, that if there is famine, you can just pray to God to do some miracle. No. Today in the world, there is no longer any natural famine. There is still famine, but it's only political famine. In the past, you had some natural disaster like drought, and you just didn't have enough food, and transportation was too costly, so millions of people died from famine. Today, there is so much food, and transportation is so cheap, that if people in some place die from hunger, like in Syria or North Korea, it's never because of a natural calamity. It's only because of political reason. If people die from hunger, it's because some government wants them to starve to death. And if you look at plagues, so today for the first time in history, more people die from old age than from infectious diseases. This is an amazing achievement. And if you look at violence, so again, more people today commit suicide than are killed by all the human violence put together. Human violence, war, crime, terrorism, everything together kills about between 600,000 and 700,000 people each year for the last decade. Suicide kills almost 1 million. Car accidents kill 1.2 million. Diabetes kills 1.5 million. So today sugar is more dangerous than gunpowder. And you are far more likely to die from eating too much pizza than from being blown up by Al-Qaeda.
Well, my wife will be very happy to hear about that, because she's always telling me, stay away from the pizza.
She's
stay away
right.
from the sugar.
Yeah, stay away from the pizza is a much better advice than stay away from the terrorists.
Yes. I'll try to avoid them too, if I can as well. But that's absolutely fascinating. So let's go back to that idea of inequality, because I think that might be shocking to some of our leaders who hear that. This concept that, medicine and all of the incredible technologies that are going into, medical devices and medicine itself and genetic treatments for things aren't just about treating the sick. Now it's about...
The basic logic of medicine has changed. If traditionally medicine is about healing, now medicine is increasingly about upgrading. It's not that there is kind of a human norm and we try to bring everybody to the norm. It's just the opposite. Yes, there is a human norm, but we try to bring at least some people above the norm, to give them, anything from running faster to having better memories, to having better emotional balance, more creativity. Basically name a human ability, and there is some scientist somewhere who is working on how to improve it, on how to upgrade it. And of course this has wonderful potential, but also it has some very dangerous potential, because upgrading in essence is an elitist project. Healing is an egalitarian project. The idea of healing is to bring everybody to the same norm, to the same level. The idea of upgrading is to give somebody an edge over others. And if some upgrade becomes so cheap and so ubiquitous that everybody has it. The poorest person in Nigeria or Bangladesh now have this upgrade, then this is just the new norm, and the elite in Tokyo or Beijing or San Francisco, they are already several generations ahead in the upgrades to memory or creativity or whatever. So the danger is that we will have the technology to start translating economic inequality into biological inequality, and once such a gap opens, it's almost impossible to close it. Because it's no longer just a matter of opportunities. Like if we give everybody the same opportunities, then they will reach the same results. No. If there is a real biological difference between the rich and the poor, so if you give them equal opportunities, the rich will do much better. They are more creative, more smart.
So wielding that power becomes important, I suppose, or thinking about the effects of those things will be a critical point for the more successful people to consider, or it will just be a runaway train.
We don't know for sure. It could create immense differences, both within societies and also between societies. It's very unlikely that all countries in the world will have the same command of the new bioengineering capabilities. If you look back at the 19th century and you look at the Industrial Revolution, so you had all these new technologies of steam engines and telegraph and modern weapons and so forth. It wasn't shared equally between all the countries. You had very few countries, like Britain and France and the US and then Russia and Japan, that industrialized and gained command of the new technologies. Most of the world was left far behind, and the few industrial nations basically conquered and exploited everybody else. It took countries like China almost 150 years to close the gap that opened in the 19th century with the Industrial Revolution. The same thing may happen again on an even larger scale. You'll have a few countries, not necessarily the same countries. Maybe this time France and England will be behind and South Korea will lead the way. But you'll have a few countries that master the new technologies of bioengineering and artificial intelligence and machine learning, and they will basically be able to conquer and exploit everybody else. And I suspect that this time, if you miss the train, you will never have a second chance. Unlike China, that missed the train in the 19th century, but managed to catch up in the last few decades, this time, because of the immense power of the new technologies, if you miss this train, you will never get a second chance.
Well, it's really a new, as you postulate, it's literally turning, it's the God-man. I mean, it's the beginning of a new type of being.
And this is why I titled the book Homo Deus, which means literally God-man, because we are in the process of acquiring divine abilities, of turning ourselves into gods. And I mean this in the most literal sense possible. It's not a metaphor. If you think about the abilities of gods according to various mythologies, we are now acquiring these abilities through ourselves. Like in the Bible, God is the creator. His chief power is to create. He creates animals and plants and humans according to his wishes. Now we are gaining this power to create life, just like God, and in a way, we even go beyond the biblical God. Because even if you believe the Bible, the only thing God managed to create are organic beings. All these trees and giraffes and humans, they are just organic. But we are now trying to create inorganic entities, inorganic life forms, cyborgs, artificial intelligence, and so forth. If we succeed, and there is a very good chance we will, then very soon we will be beyond the God of the Bible.
Incredible powers, incredible powers. As I'm thinking about the two books almost as a two-book project, is that So you describe from the beginning of the cognitive revolution through those three, agricultural and scientific, and then looking forward, each time humanity gained tremendous power, and to both do good and to do otherwise. I mean, you said that, you know, science and all of this technology, it's not deterministic.
Yes.
So how should we be thinking about right and wrong? How should we as leaders be thinking about ethics even? Do you have a view of that, or is it a bad question?
No, it's a very good question. It's a key question. First of all, we need to think, who are we? Are we humankind, or are we just a small elite? One of the things that is happening right now in the world is that you see the elite diverging from humankind as a whole, and already seeing beyond the horizon, or on the horizon, the possibility of a real split. That the future of the elite and the future of Homo sapiens, that's a different future, because the elite is going to be transformed into a different kind of species. So one key question is, who are we? And are we serving the interests of humankind as a whole, or are we serving the interest of a potentially new species emerging out of Homo sapiens? Another key question is the question of information and data. The key today to all these developments is basically information and the ability to process it. Not just information about, you know, economic trends and political data. It's above all biometric information about what's happening inside the human being. This is the key to understanding humans, to controlling humans, and to upgrading humans. The information coming from within their bodies and brains. We are just on the verge of the revolution of biometric sensors, which is beginning with Fitbit and things like that. Very soon, everybody will be wearing biometric sensors all the time, and you will generate more information about your body and brain in a day than people did in their entire life. And the question is, who is going to own this information? Will it be your possession, or will it be owned by Google or Apple or the government? In the past, the most important asset in the world was first land and then machinery. And you had these big political conflicts. Who owns the land? Who owns the machinery, the factories, the means of production? In the 21st century, the big question is, who owns the data? And we still haven't even began a real public political debate about that. So this is another ethical and political question. And there are several others. I mean, basically, the more power you have, the more ethics becomes important. Because then the question is what to do with all these immense powers, whose interests are you serving, and what are you ignoring?
It's a pretty dramatic shift from the collective to the individual, but then this, you know, these massive clouds of data out there that people are accepting almost with religious vigor. It's shocking how much people take what's out there for granted.
Yes, largely because they just don't understand. I think we may have reached the limit of what human beings can be expected to understand. The world today is so complicated, and the new technologies are so making it even more complicated, that maybe we have to just acknowledge that most people are no longer capable of really understanding what's happening in the world. And you see it in political debates that the main issues in political debates are not the most important questions. They are the things people can still understand. To talk to the masses about, you know, machine learning and clouds and things like that, they just don't understand. You talk to them about immigration, and the Mexicans will take your jobs. Oh, this I understand. So, it's like even in sometimes you see it even in meetings in universities or corporations. There are two items on the agenda. One is a very complicated financial decision about millions and millions of dollars, which very few people understand, and you discuss it for 10 minutes and you just accept whatever the chief financial officer tells you. And then the other item is whether to change the coffee machine. And then you have a 2 hours discussion, because everybody understands what you're talking about. And I think that this is what is happening on a large scale today in the world. We talk about the unimportant things that we understand instead of about the really important things that most people don't understand.
That's a great question for us. So I have a few more questions, if you don't mind. I want to ask a question about AI, and then I want to ask you about some of your own learning and sort of the processes that you yourself followed to get your mind here. So AI can be kind of scary, right? I mean, we if human beings rose to the sort of top of the food chain, even though we weren't really on the top of the food chain for a long time, it seems like we're almost creating these things that are on a different level in the food chain to us.
A different food chain altogether.
Yeah, different food chain, yes.
I think we are very close to the point when AI will be more intelligent than us, but it's very important to emphasize that it doesn't mean, like in science fiction, that it will gain consciousness and have desires and things like that. In 99% of science fiction movies, the basic plot is you create a very intelligent computer, the computer gains consciousness, and then either the scientist falls in love with the computer, or the computer tries to kill all the humans, or both things happen at the same time.
Yes.
Now, this is science fiction, it isn't science. We don't understand consciousness at all. So far, we have made exactly zero development in creating artificial consciousness. There is absolutely no reason to think that AI will develop consciousness in the next 50 years or 500 years. We tend to confuse intelligence with consciousness because in humans they go together. Intelligence is the ability to solve problems. Consciousness is the ability to feel things, to have subjective experiences like pain and pleasure and love and hate. Humans solve problems by feeling things. Computers don't. In computers, intelligence is completely separate from consciousness. It works in a different way. It's quite likely that computers will become even more intelligent than us, but still will never develop consciousness. So, what will this do to the world? Nobody knows. What does a world look like when it is dominated by super intelligent but non-conscious algorithms? Nobody knows to answer to this question.
But worth thinking about. So it feels to me in the overall vein of, we're storytelling beings, and we've been living in this long arc of a lot of stories playing out through history. And that some of those stories are sort of, the relevance of some of those stories is coming to an end, and we're at a time when new stories are beginning.
Yes.
Very much so when it comes to, it's really a nice divide between your two books. One of the stories that I'm eager to I've been dying to ask you, honestly, which is, do we have this progress imperative? There's this view right now, as exciting as technology is, and exciting as that now that innovations are happening at this exponential rate, and the human mind isn't very good at thinking in exponentials. In fact, it can't at all. We think very linearly. As exciting as technology is there this imperative view that everything old will be destroyed? What's the value of the stuff of our past and our history going forward?
The breaks in history are never complete. Something always survives from the past. It adapts, it takes on new shapes, and this is likely to happen in the 21st century too. We won't just discard our everything we've inherited, all the religions, all the political ideologies, all the art and so forth. It won't just disappear one day. some of it will disappear, but some of it will be changed and adapted and repackaged. And even though I also share the belief that technology is going to improve or develop in an exponential rate, I don't share the assumption or the belief that this will necessarily create a better world. I'm not apocalyptic either. I don't think there is an inevitable apocalypse waiting in the next 50 years. I think we have an open-ended future. The same technologies could be used to create paradise or hell or anything in between. And nothing is determined in advance. And again, I look back as a historian, and for example, if you look at nuclear weapons, so in the 1950s and 60s, many people, including experts, thought that the Cold War will inevitably end in a nuclear catastrophe, destroying human civilization. But it didn't happen. Instead, nuclear weapons gave the incentive to the superpowers to change the political system, the international system, so that today, thanks in no small measure to nuclear weapons, we experience a more peaceful world than in any previous time in history. On the other hand, you have very negative examples, like what we have been doing to the climate, that the situation of the climate and of the ecological system is deteriorating very rapidly, and many of us don't even agree to acknowledge that this is happening, and even those who acknowledge don't do much to stop it. Basically, with present-day technology, the only way to stop climate change is to stop economic growth, and no country is willing to do that. So we have a very, very big problem there.
Well, so we may be becoming gods, but we don't have to be the restless, angry gods of Homer, per se.
Hopefully, but so far we look more like the restless, angry gods of Homer
Capricious,
than
yes.
some serene Buddhas and Brahmas living their life in complete quiet.
As well, we need to work on painting that story. So, about your process, and then we'll let you go. And I appreciate this time. You're an historian, and you've taken this incredibly, broad view of history and through a deep study. Why study history, and what has that process been for you to learn to not just be an academic historian studying some tiny moment in history, to study all of it?
I think the main purpose of studying history is to understand the present and the potential futures better. You don't study history for the sake of the past, it's gone. So the question is, how can history help us understand our present and future better? And this is what I try to do as a historian. I still define myself as a historian above all, not a futurologist, not a biologist or an expert on artificial intelligence. I'm above all an expert on history. My main field of expertise originally was medieval military history. I studied the Crusades and things like that.
Well, we're kindred spirits. My graduate work was in ancient Greek philosophy,
Oh.
so there we go. I say it's useless in the practical sense, but it makes tremendous dinner conversation at some point or another. I understand that you meditate. You've had a long-standing meditation practice. How has that helped you create this incredible clarity around your thinking and your writing?
I think the most important thing to understand today is the mind. Because the human mind still controls all these immense new technological powers, and the most promising and troubling new technology is the technology to start changing the human mind. And we know very, very little about the human mind, even though there is great progress in understanding the brain. The brain isn't the mind. They are connected, they are related, but they are not the same thing. The brain is a physical entity made of neurons and synapses and hormones and so forth. The mind is the flow of subjective experiences like pain and love and anger. Now, we assume that somehow when millions of neurons fire in a particular pattern, this creates the subjective experience of love or hate, but we have absolutely no idea how, and we have a very limited understanding of what really happens in the mind, not in the brain. And this is why one of the reasons that I spend 2 hours every day meditating, and I go every year to do a long meditation retreat. This year I'm going for 60 days of meditation retreat. I practice Vipassana meditation, which I learned from a teacher called Esen Goenka. And in this, there are many types of meditation. Meditation is a generic name. There are so many different techniques. This particular technique, Vipassana, the only guideline, very simple but very difficult to actually practice, is observe reality as it is. Not the reality on the TV screen or the computer screen, but what is really happening in your body and in your mind right now. And it starts with simple things, or supposedly simple things, like watching your breath coming in and out of your nostrils. You want to understand the global economic system, and it's very difficult because you don't know what's real, what's fictional. Okay, leave aside the world economic system, try to observe your breath. See whether you can do that, to just see the reality of when your breath comes in and when your breath goes out. Most people, including myself, when I started meditation, they can't do it for more than 3 or 4 breaths. You try, oh, it comes in, it comes in, it goes out, suddenly a thought comes, or some memory comes, and hijacks your attention, and you completely lose attention, and after 5 minutes you remember, oh, I was supposed to observe my breath. And this was the first shock to me when I started meditating, when I was doing my PhD at Oxford, that I know almost nothing about my mind, and I have almost no control over it. And since then, for 17 years, I've been practicing Vipassana, and this gave me a better understanding of my mind and of minds in general, and it also gave me the ability to focus more and to think much more clearly, especially this basic ability to separate reality from fiction. Because this is the basis of the meditation. You just try to see what is really happening and not allow the mind to generate some story, some fantasy, and superimpose it on the reality.
That's fantastic. I've been practicing for 4 or 5 years, and not to the degree that you are. You're like you're a ninja at meditating. But I can tell you, it's unlocked clarity in my mind, and I talk to YPOers all over the world that this is the beginning of the superpower that we all need as leaders to be present and to be able to try to distinguish what's real and what's not.
Yeah.
So thank you for that perspective. So maybe just a final question, because we're a learning organization. It's not about knowledge and expertise and beating our chests how successful we are. It's what we're learning. So what are you learning now? And are there any books or things that maybe we could be thinking about ourselves as a big collective group? I know that's a big...
I read constantly. I actually mostly listen, not read. I listen to audiobooks.
Oh, audiobooks.
Like I take my dog for a walk in the woods and I listen to an audiobook. So I try to be very eclectic. I don't focus just on economics or biology or history. I try to keep my horizons very wide. And I start a lot of books and stop listening or reading after 5 pages or 10 pages. If a book didn't teach me something interesting and important in the first 10 pages, I leave it aside. And I said, there are so many other books out there. So I keep changing, and this is my method. I mean, it doesn't necessarily work for everybody.
Well, that gives me an excuse, because I've been doing that for years, and I thought maybe I was just lazy to not finish the 700-page boring book that I didn't really want to read. That's
no, I tell you, there are so many excellent books out there that I will never have the time in my life to read. That there is no reason to waste time on not so good books.
Yes, that's true. Well, it sounds like you're focusing on the right things, and I really sincerely believe you're helping our group get focused on what are the possibilities of the future, and some things that we ought to be thinking about how to make that a more positive future, a more heavenly future than the apocalyptic one that could be out there. So thank you so much for your time. It's really been my pleasure, our pleasure, and we're very grateful for the insights. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to this audience.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks.